Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stramaglio Show. I am really thrilled and honored today to have someone that's near and dear to my heart, and certainly one of the most successful, dealers and business people in our industry. And please join me in welcoming Barry Simon to the show.
Thanks, Mike. I'm honored to be part of it. And, you and your family are special to me also. And I'm honored to be here. So thank you.
Well, it's a great pleasure. It's been long overdue, and here we are, and it's a very special occasion. So you're kind of doing the Grateful Dead tour as you wind your daily activity at Datamax down into your next chapter of life. So for those of you that don't know, Barry is retiring,
Yeah.
and the dates have been set. We're going to talk to him a little bit about that. And I want to start, Barry, with asking you some questions. I've been really enjoying this book, and I think there are 44 or 40, yeah, 44 various chapters that you basically have produced with your team, and it's called Letters from a Leader. And this is a fitting, absolute, perfect, I think, representation of you and your career. So number one, I want to thank you. Number two, I've learned a lot. And number three, I have some questions, because of this book. So
Sure.
let's start, Barry, with how on earth did you end up in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1985? If you can give us a little glimpse of that journey.
Well, sure. So in 1981, actually, I met Dick Collier and Steve Sumner. And Steve's dad just recently passed away at that time. And the company there in St. Louis was AV Dick Product Center. AVX Products Company, and then they changed the name to Datamax shortly thereafter that. So I started there, and then in 1983, we bought an operation in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Steve's brother David came here in '83, and then in '85, right around '85, David felt that he just didn't want to be in the business, and Steve and Eddie at that time asked if I would move to Little Rock and become president of Datamax Arkansas, and that's what I did. We had probably 15, 16 people, and we got here, and it was just a great opportunity for myself and the people here.
So, again, for the audience that may not know, where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Chicago, north side of Chicago. So as a kid growing up, we used to clean a section of Wrigley Field and get tickets for the next game. And we'd take the L train, and then actually we also would go down to Comiskey Park and Museum of Science and Industry. As a kid in Chicago, it was great. It really was. I mean, we could just go anything and do things. And the only thing my dad ever asked was that I make sure that I was home for dinner.
Well, you and I share the roots of Chicago. So back in the day, that was truly one of the finest cities to grow up in. And the fact that you were, call it a staple at Wrigley Field, I'm surprised I didn't run into you there. And for those of you that don't know, the Loop is very famous for Barry and myself and any Chicagoan. So how does someone that was born and raised, I was always fascinated by this. How does someone who's born and raised, grew up in Chicago, big city, how did you transition into Little Rock?
Well, I guess I got to go back a little bit. So I went to school at SIU in Carbondale, and that's where I met my wife. And at that time, I will say we got into what was called office supplies and printing company, and we sold office supplies and printings with another three gut partners and stuff. And from there, actually, we bought a place in Ruston, Louisiana. So after Patty and I got married, and I told this the other day because people got a kick out of this, we got married in a bar that I managed, and it was interesting because it was 3 stories, and we had a beer garden, and we had bands play, and it was just wow. People were playing pinball machines and foosball and pool, and it was just a great time. I mean, and the food and stuff was donated by the owner. He was the gymnastics coach, and it was great. So from there, in the office supply side, we bought it, and as we talked, Patty and I went from Southern Illinois to Ruston, Louisiana. And you talk about a Yankee being in Ruston, Louisiana. That was different back in the late '70s. They had bumper stickers that said "Drive 70 and freeze a Yankee." So we used to joke around, and I mean, I don't think I've ever met a person that I couldn't talk to. So even there, it was funny. They said, you talk pretty fast. You must have been from New Orleans. And I never said anything. I just giggled. So I'd never lied. I just never told them I was from Chicago. I figured they wouldn't go for that too much back then. So, and it was great. We had a great time there. We lasted about 10 months, and then we sold that business, back. And I moved and got into the office supplies in St. Louis. And then one of the partners that was in the business, he went with Xerox as their national sales manager. I guess not VP. He was going to be high up there. And at that time, I just chose not to go with him. He wanted to do it, and I just didn't want to be a big company. But he told me about this company, AB Dick and Datamax, and that's when we met, and that's how I started. So actually, we lived in 3 states in 10 months. So Patty was a trooper. She was a trooper.
Oh my God, that's a trooper, especially those towns.
Well, it was also funny in Ruston. We, that back then, it was high. Oil and gas was big, and they were doing well. And one of the people couldn't pay, their bill, and they gave me a boat.
Oh no!
For their payment, and then I had to leave to go. I went to St. Louis, and Patty had to drive the boat back with the car and our dog.
Well, if I remember somewhere in that book, I read that Patty kept reminding you, or may still remind you, that she's not an employee.
Oh, well, yeah, that was, yes. That started with, when I tried to pull some Mike Reardon stuff with her. I said, what's our outcome here? And what's this? She goes, hey, let me tell you, I'm not one of your employees. And still to this day, we got to be careful when I'm home and she's home. I got to make sure that this is her house.
I get that. I get it. And Mo, so.
Oh, yeah.
We tread very carefully. And by the way, again, for the audience, oftentimes I'm very fortunate because through the years, business acquaintances have turned into brothers or members of my family. And I can't thank you, Barry, enough, and your family for all the things that you've done for me and my family through the years, and especially, the last couple of years. It's been a challenge on occasion, and you're always there. You're always there. And I thank you forever for that. Sometimes you need that friend just to say, hey, you okay? And you never miss it. So let's go back again to your career. So as you began, when you look back on it now, I mean, 1985, that was a different world, different time. Yeah. And here we are, in 26, going on 27 pretty soon. And everything has changed so dramatically. What was your most challenging and exciting time? I know in your storied career, that's hard to choose, but what was that time for you that said, whoa, this is a challenge?
Mike, there probably were 2 times. And the first was when I first moved there, to Little Rock, because, I wasn't from here, and that made a difference. So I got involved in the community pretty fast, and that was one of the things, being part of stuff. I got in the YPO, Young Presidents Organization. So that was probably a real plus. And then CDA, the Copier Dealers Association. So all 3 of those impacted, where I felt we needed to be. So I learned in all 3 different ways. And being in the community, people saw that we were more, or even myself in the company was just more. We were willing to give back. And back then, a lot of people didn't do that. It was just different at the time. And then in I guess it would have been 1994, 95, the business grew in Arkansas by 30%. And that's a big growth. And when we were going through a lot of stuff, morale was bad because we just couldn't keep up with a lot of it. And Bill Frazier introduced, I knew Mike Reardon, but Bill Frazier's the one who said, hey, you need to call Mike. And I called Mike Reardon, and we talked and we shook hands. And that's when we developed our whole process of SBS Gaskin team. And we got all of our managers trained on what they needed to do and how they needed to be. And that made a huge difference. And we started setting the process up. And then we also went off site. And I remember I had a mission statement and they said, well, that's your mission statement. It's not ours. And that's when we went off and did our company philosophy and principles of operation, which is the little blue book. that we still live to today, you know, I mean, and hopefully they'll continue with that book.
Yeah.
But, you know, that became where we were at. That became our culture, and that became starting to establish the stuff where, you know, I've had some people 40 years plus, and, you know, managers that are 25 years plus, and, you know, that whole scenario. So those, you know, that was all part of it. And then probably the next was when the pandemic hit. And, you know, when the pandemic hit, you know, there were people calling and saying, "What are you doing? And what are you thinking?" and all that stuff. And I said, you know, right. I mean, you know, we have a culture. We have the book. How can I say these people are family and I'm going to start letting people go? I said, we're keeping everybody on. And I started doing videos every week to everybody and talking to them and letting them know that nobody is being let go. And, you know, this is what we're doing. We don't know what's going to come out of this, but right now you don't have to worry about whether you're going to be able to feed your family. And that made a big difference and impacted it and stuff. And that carried on because I think when that started coming out, what people were finding is that some of these people weren't coming back. You know, they didn't trust the company, and we didn't have that as an issue. So
Hmm.
those are probably the main, you know, I mean, if there was a core of that stuff. And then, you know, obviously when I first got in it, we were selling mimeographs, spirit duplicators, and offset presses, and, you know, how it evolved and changing. I mean, heck, we used to do $2 million in electronic typewriters
Can you imagine?
and then fax machines and stuff. So, you know, it's evolved.
So now that you're in this chapter of your career and you know you're facing your next journey, which is retirement and all the things that you want to do after your career, what is the hardest thing for you to adjust to and defer to Steve and the team and let go? What do you find to be the most difficult for you?
I would probably say just, you know, just that, you know, used to walking in every morning, saying hi to everybody, greeting everybody. And, you know, that's just the way I was calling. And I still call people on their birthdays and anniversaries. So I haven't stopped that. And then, you know, I mean, I haven't changed my thing. I still get up, meet a guy at 3:30 in the morning. We work out every morning, except for on the weekend. So I tried to stay as much as I could with some of the stuff. And I think the harder part is when we have things that I hear about, because the hardest thing for all of these people is understanding the manufacturers and how do you talk to them and how do you get with them and make them understand what we're doing in that capacity. So that's been probably the stuff. And, you know, it's just not being in the heat of the stuff. And I just got to get used to it. But I think, you know, as I kind of shared, these guys, you know, I mean, they got to get their nose bloodied a little bit and see, and because we had to do it, you know, we had to start moving on.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I can feel for what you're feeling. Obviously, at my age and my state and career, so letting go is always an interesting emotion, I guess, if nothing else, if not practical. So when you look at Datamax now, and the not the new team, but the team basically taking the reins, what message do you want to convey to the leadership team and frankly the employees?
Well, I think the biggest thing is right now, don't make changes. You know, run with what you have and understand where you're at. You know what I mean? And the two things that we've always lived by is culture trumps everything. And it's also about creating raving fans. So everything that we should do should be geared around how do we create that raving fan with our customers or prospects, and how do we do it internally? And I think before you make a decision, think through it. And always, you know, I mean, all the things I used to always think about is how does that impact our employees or our customers?
Mm.
You know, I mean, because if you don't, that's what's going to get you in trouble. I mean, like the pandemic. I mean, the simplest thing would be, hey, we need to let people go or put them on furlough or cut their pay. That's not an answer. You know, you
Mm.
got to really look back, because how are they going to look at it? I mean, the other thing that we did during that time, if a salesperson got an order, and this blew people away, if a salesperson got an order, I paid them. We paid them for it. We didn't, and it was 6, 8 months before some of that stuff would have been delivered.
Oh, you
We
paid
didn't
them out, you paid them
pay them.
based on the order.
Yeah, paid them on the order. And, you know, we always used to pay when it was delivered. But I, you know, I mean, I said, guys, don't stop selling. You know, what I mean, so they didn't. So when it came back, you know, we had a lot of stuff out there.
So in reading some of these chapters and the messages that your team noted for you, there were a couple of things that kind of jumped out at me, and one of them was the true blue acts of service. And what does that mean? What does that mean for your employees and for you?
I mean, well, first of all, you're referring back to the book.
Yes.
Okay, well, first let me kind of clear that that was something that when we bought Greg Walker's business, and that was in I think 18 or so, 18 or 19. And when we bought Greg, and his nephew was a guy named Jeff Walker, and he and we talked, and Jeff came on, and then he had a thing at that time called the Letter on the Third, and it was totally different. And what I said, I like that idea, and we changed it to the Rave Review. And every month, 2 week, probably about a week or two before the third of the month, Jeff would call me and he would give me a topic, and then him and I would talk, and we would go through it. And I think there's 93 of those. And as we went through it, and then I mean, I didn't even think about it, but when I did at the retirement party, Jeff they handed me that books, and he said, Barry, every time that we sat and talked, I was just so inspired that I had to do more than just have it, and we wanted to put this book together, and that's what they did. And that was our way of communicating to all the employees. When you got 12 locations, you got to figure a way to how do you make that happen. And we would call each one of our locations and get something out of them. Somebody got to say something, and that was the way to keep culture in the company, because otherwise, yourself, some branch and in one of the little areas thinks, well, we're just a stepchild. And you don't want that to feel that way. You want them to know, hey, they're part of it, just as much part of it. And you want to make sure you don't create subcultures. So that was kind of our way to be able to do it. And I almost started crying when Jeff gave me that book. Jeff and Robert both.
Well, I have to tell you, knowing you as I do, I had a couple of tears in my eyes too. So it's a beautifully written reflection of you and your career. Just a great book.
Yeah.
And more importantly, your words of wisdom are just incredible. Obviously, it was a work of love. I mean, every word that I read, every passage that I read, it was you offering a great deal of good counsel, but you could tell, as you go through each one of those, 42, 41, 39, whatever was going on in your career, that was a work of love. You were sharing very human things. Is that how, am I reading this right?
Yeah, no, that's a fact. I mean, and I think that's where, Jeff was coming from, is that, it shared from my early on days to what what it was and how we did it. And, yeah, I mean, that's just how it came about. I mean, from all the different topics, I don't have it in front of me, but there were all these different things that came about. And, that was like Raving fans. That was in 1995. I read the book, and people always ask me, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, I want, too many times people would talk about customer satisfaction. And I said, I don't want satisfied customers. I want them to be a Raving fan. If somebody asks you where you work, oh, Datamax, what a great company. We do this, this, and this, and this. You get the people excited. If they call a customer and ask a customer, the customer would say, oh, gosh, when I call them, they take care of me. Their bills are right. That, their service is response, not, oh, they're okay. Their pricing, is good. And, you don't want that. So that was probably our biggest theme. And we always talked about, if somebody comes into your office, pay attention, talk to them, make them feel good, make them feel that they're the most important thing right now.
It's interesting. I don't know anybody else in the industry. The whole Raving fan thing, that's you. I mean, when I talk to anybody and I say, well, I'm going to call the Raving fan, everybody knows you. It's like your share, it's like Barry Simon / Raving fan. Everyone knows you for that. So that's a pretty impressive handle, if I can say it that way. So when you're looking forward now, and obviously you've got a nice steady cadence with what you want to do, what's your recommendation? What do you see for the industry? You've been in it a long time, you've been through all these changes. Now we've got IT services and all this other stuff. What are your thoughts on go forward?
Well, I mean, and I'll say it and then I'll share it. And this is not a plug for ECS, but I do think that we've taken that to another level. I mean, and listening to the people there when you got into what we need to do in AI and you talk about all the things, I think that's important today. I mean, that's where you're looking at what's going to be next. What's the next thing out there? People talk, how do you diversify? You have to diversify. I mean, I don't think there's any way of getting around that. You can't just sell just copiers anymore and think, because you got to figure out what do I need to do to make that customer the best they can be, and how can we take care of them in technology. That's my first impression of that, and I learned a lot through ECS that I wasn't getting from our manufacturers, or or some of these things. And I think all the manufacturers heard a different story when they were at ECS. So I mean, that's the first, and foremost, is understanding it. The other part is never ever get away from your culture. You got to know what your why is, and you have to understand that. And then the people in your company need to know that. There's three things about a leader, and I share this all the time. One, they ask, does that person know what they're doing? And whether you're a manager or not. The other was, do they care about me? And the third is, can I trust them? So can I trust them? Can they trust me? And if you don't have those three, you're not a leader. And just don't, because you got a title, means that that you're there, you arrived. The people have to believe that. I used to share these things all the time. It's like that sergeant that runs up the hill and nobody follows them because they don't believe in it. So that's probably the other. And then I think it comes down to, and I really do like the breakaway team, next generation, however you want to word them. It is them understanding that it's two sides. One, what do we see in that, and what do they see in that, and how do we stay within our culture? Because if you start changing culture, then you got to be prepared for a whole different ball game. So I think that's probably the toughest part for the next generation, is to want to come in and say, hey, I need to do this. And I think you got to be careful. It doesn't mean you don't look at things. And I've always been, and we always will be, a company that works from the office. You got to be there, because I think it's like family. You don't have you can't have your family living somewhere else and talk to them all the time and think that that's going to work. Now, can it happen every once in a while? Yeah. But if you remember during that time when you saw some of your family members were in a nursing home, and you couldn't go in, and you're looking at them through a window, that killed you.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at somebody working from home all the time. Yeah, is there a need for somebody to be able to do that? Yes. But it's not full time, because I don't think you can create that culture. And that's just my model of the world. I think it's tough when you don't have it, because people, they don't have the same thing that you would have, and vice versa. And again, if you want to walk around and say hi to people and let them know you care, you can do that.
Well, you clearly care, and I see it. Everyone that knows you sees it every day. And if I can add, if I recall correctly, you never missed a CDA meeting.
Well,
you've never missed ECS.
no. Well, with CDA, there was one meeting in 41 years, I guess. One meeting I missed, and it was because I was chairman of this. We were just opening up a cancer center, and I was chairman of the board, and I couldn't change it. However, I always said that we made up the meeting because we were in Cancun when the hurricane came through, and we were supposed to have a CDA meeting, and they canceled it. So I made up the meeting.
So it was a near miss.
Yes. Now CDA did a great job. I went to the last meeting, in March in Salt Lake City, and they had a chance, and Jonathan and I talked and went through things, and that was a great meeting. It was, it's so humbling when people get up and talk about, that, and, I had different people get up and share things and stories, and, that was nice. It really was. You sit back and say, gosh, I guess these things are worthwhile. And CDA, I always encourage people to be part of a group, because it helped. It made a big difference in my life and our company. In fact, people used to always wonder when I came home, what are we going to change?
Well, CDA certainly has the most successful dealers, arguably the most successful dealers in the country, as its members. So that's a pretty major accomplishment. that group has been very successful.
We were, one of the things that we did is I wanted to try to have something that we can give to all of our employees, at different times, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and 25 years. And one of the things I felt, because some people do it later on, we chose 25 years as the big point where we'll give people a trip, and they get a free trip, and we pay and all this stuff, and they get a choice of where they want to go and everything. And the reason I chose 25 years was, as we talked, is some people could start at another company and then come with you. You know what I mean? And 25 years is still a lot. And we've got people
Yeah.
that are 35 and 40, but at that point, I wanted to be able to have people that did come with us and go through that and see that it would meant something to it. So that was the True Blue loyalty program. They got something at 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 30. So as long as they were there, they got stuff.
Well, I like that. That's great. That's true. That's truly True Blue.
Well, it made
they
it feel.
yeah.
And I don't want to not say this, because this is, I think, a big coup that we did, and this probably goes back 15 or 20 years. One of the things that we established, as a company is PTO time. We went from people had sick time and vacation time and all that. We put it all into one and called it PTO time. And then one of the things, as we did it, as we talked through this, the thing that we came up with, and I'm amazed that not more people do this, because to me, it was one of the greatest thing we've done. And that was it, because people sometimes can't take all their time off, and you don't
Right.
want people to, you can't keep carrying it. So what we did is, any time that they had left over, at least 50% of it, we would put into their 401k.
Ah,
And they didn't have to pay taxes, and it was a win-win for both sides. And we had people, even if it's a day or two, go in there and see it, and then all of a sudden they start seeing that grow in their 401k, and that was a plus. I mean, that's a whole nother, you're trying to look at ways to retain people and do things, and that was it. And we also have a profit sharing program. And then the other thing that we did is, we just started this probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe less than that, was talking about giving back into the community. And so as we talked about things, and people were talking about days, so what we did is we gave them one free day to either work at a charity of their choice, work a charity of their choice, go to a church, work at their church, or do something, and we wouldn't count it towards their PTO time, because that's saying that we believe in this. So if they got an event, how can you say giving back to the community and not support them?
those are incredible things, and that culture. I mean, every time I come visit you, you can feel the culture. I know I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of Barb Knoll. So
Oh, yeah.
I can't ignore her. So Barb, if you're out there, thank you for everything you've done for us. So when you think about, and I want you to kind of run free here. So what thoughts do you have that you want to share with the industry about you, Datamax, or just in general?
Well, I don't know about me or the company. I mean, I think that's us. I mean, we've always stayed thing. The most important thing, I think, is when you're interviewing, and I think whether it's a customer or a prospect or your own employees, and I'll start with the employees. You got to find out, what are they passionate about.
Hmm.
Too many times people come in and they want a job, and you got to make sure, if somebody's passionate about being a salesperson or being it, we're very fortunate over the years, as we had receptionists, they wanted to be receptionists. I
Hmm.
mean, and as you talk about salespeople, there's different types. You got to make sure. I mean, I did it. I interviewed one person one time, and I always ask the question: what would it be what job would you like to have if you couldn't fail at it? What I mean? And they'd back up, and one guy said to me that he wanted to own a restaurant. And I
Oh,
hesitated and said, well, listen, I understand that. Why don't you go work for a restaurant, even if you have to be a dishwasher, and do that, because that's your passion. You don't need to be in here selling. What I mean? And I think too many times sometimes we hire people, and I think it's listening to them. When you're doing your interview, let them talk. You
hmm.
ask the questions, but let them talk, because you're going to learn so much about it. And I think when you're talking with customers or prospects, too many times we want to puke on them on what we do. Oh, we got this and we got that, and our response time. Blah, 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 blah. Ask them. ask them, what would you like out of a technology company? What would you see? And you go through these things. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes as I went out with some of our employees and we'd meet with somebody and they say that they were happy. And I said, well, tell me, what are you happy with? And they would go, oh, well, they would just, when we needed a new machine, they would replace it and yada, yada, yada. And I said, well, let me ask you, I said, so over the years, has any of them ever met with your current employees to find out if any of their needs changed and all that? And they looked at me, I said, do you do partnership reviews? They looked at me like I was nuts. And then we started saying what it meant and what it did. And all of a sudden they weren't as happy as they thought they were. And I think as you listen to these things, I mean, it's just like this, we go back and forth, we learn something. And I think as you learn more about it, and I encourage all of our salespeople, if you know people's birthdays and you know these things, and all of a sudden, or a child is in sports, and you got a customer or even a prospect, and you send it to them and say, hey, how did so and so do at their game? These people, it blows them away. And we get away from that sometimes. And also, I mean, with emails and all this stuff, too many times we do more emails. I try to encourage people. It doesn't happen, but I try to say, write thank you notes. I mean, write a thank you note. That's saying more to it than just an email. I mean, and everything has its niche and stuff, makes sense, but don't get away from what you think really should be there. And that is, I mean, I like getting a thank you note. When I get them, I read them.
Well, you know what? That's great advice. And I agree. When I get a thank you note, I save them. I mean, depending on who sent it, I save them.
Here, just see this one. I just got this. We sponsored a marathon, and the girl that heads it up wrote me a thank you note.
Oh, nice.
And she knows how that is meant.
Well, they take the time and it's thoughtful, so you just inspired me to do better at that. So I appreciate it.
The other thing and now David's doing it, these Davids are doing them, I mean, after every sale, I always wrote a letter thanking the people for buying from us. And the first one, if they were a new customer, it was a little bit more because it went through a lot more stuff. And then every time they bought something else, we would thank them. But more importantly, anytime we would lose a sale, I thanked them for giving us the opportunity to do it, and things change. And there were times where somebody would call and they would tell you what happened, or they would say, hey, next one you're going to get, or they would say, hey, I got a lead for you.
Ah.
I mean, and these were all just 3 little things that we did that, and it's funny because now I'm sharing all these things that, differentiators, because, you always have to look, how are you differentiating? But, it's always funny. What I always say, there's 3 types of people in this world too. There's booers who boo everything. Oh yeah, that doesn't work. And then there's stewers who'll say, I'm going to get to that someday. And then there's doers, and you got to decide, what do you want to be?
Boy, that's a simple philosophy, isn't it? I like that. So, a couple of quick questions about the business.
Mm-hmm.
You have a pretty tenured staff, and now you have new people running the company, and you have young people coming into the company. Have you found any major differences between the younger people coming into the company?
Well, sure. I mean, they they have different things. I mean, they grew up on the cell phone. I mean, they grew up on technology, and stuff. And now there's goods and bads to that. The positive that comes out, those are going to be the first ones to pick up AI and some of the things that we need to know and that thing. But I think if you brought them on, I call it, if you onboard them properly, when you onboard a new person and do it, and you share with them what you have, you're going to have a good team fit. You can't bring somebody on that's already starting off and says, well, I want to work from home and I want to do this, and and all these things. You got to be careful. I think every company and every person, there's a right, I call it right person, right job, right relationship, coming from our stuff that we learned with Mike Reardon. And I think you got to know those things. So I think we're fortunate in the fact that Cody, my son here at least, is young enough so when he knows a lot of that information, and when he brings people on, they're already used to it. He knows that some of the stuff that we do is good. Now, it doesn't mean you don't listen, because I think I always share people, the biggest thing in our blue book, one of the bigger things is we have the right to disagree. And I
Mm.
always say, you always go back to number 6, and they say, well, what does that say? I said, that means as long as we make the decision that's good for the entire organization. And I think anytime you really are going to do that, that's how you grow. You don't grow because Barry or anybody else said this is the way we need to do it. I'm not, you're not out there. So you always got to listen to what these people say, and then you evaluate it, and then you say, oh yeah, hey, that sounds good. We've got some of our best ideas from our people.
So you're a giver. I mean, I've seen you give in so many ways, whether it was EA. I can speak very clearly. You're advisory council member for me with ECS and the consortium, and you lead every ECS with a prayer from the Rotary. How important has the Rotary been to you in your life?
Oh gosh, Rotary, my neighbor brought me in, and gosh, I want to say, yes, we came here in 85, maybe 86, 86, 87. Rotary is fantastic. I mean, one, we're the 99th club in the world. So, I mean, in Little Rock. So that's big. We were at one time at 400 members. I'm not positive of where we're at now, but we had a lot of great speakers, a lot of great things. I'm a Paul Harris fellow. It's great. And more importantly, the contacts that I got out of that is
Mm.
unbelievable. I mean, if you go around and see how many people are customers, it's pretty interesting. And it's only because of not, sharing and talking about things and meeting people. I would encourage people to be in Rotary if they've got lead groups. I've been in a lead group for a long time. If you are the president, YPO is huge. That was probably a big thing for me. And I think Rotary clubs are just great. They give back.
Well, we appreciate you kicking us off. You're our good luck charm for every ECS with the beginning prayer, and we thank you. You've never missed one. You've been a huge contributor,
Yeah.
and it's because of you and John. And speaking of John and some of the other of our crew, is there anyone that you would like to? And this is dangerous, I know. So you probably have a long list, but is there anyone that you would like to mention or thank for any particular reason?
You know, I mean, there is a lot. I mean, there is. Bill Frazier has probably been one, only because Bill and I, when we met at, gosh, I think it was Longboat Key, and changed the way CDA did. We wrote up new bylaw. I mean, and that stuff, and changed that. Bill was one. Jim Fuchs was the one who encouraged me to get into YPO. And then you got John, and Bob Goldberg has been a blessing. I mean, I could always be able to pick up the phone and call and talk to him. And Mike Reardon. I mean, Mike, he's been a great mentor. And then, you, Mike, have been great. For me, there's so many, because, I go back to Mr. Bamba, Mr. Metarai, Sam Yoshida, all them. They're friends. I mean, it wasn't like, that, and even Laura and Sam. Laura
Yep.
and Sam Riggio, those, you go through these things and they become your friends, and not just, so when you do call up, they know you're not just complaining or bitching, I always call it. And oh gosh, I could go on and on. I mean, I've been very fortunate, knock on wood, to have a lot of great friends, and in the business and also outside. And then I also have to thank my darling bride, Patty, because she's allowed me to do all this and be part of it and go, and that's, you can't do that without that.
Well, we're coming up on time here, and I don't want to fail to mention, every year we've done the Patriot Pack. You have welcomed us into your home. Patty has been so kind to let these crazy motorcycle guys come in there and eat and tear it up. What has the Patriot Pack meant to you and your family?
Well, one, you got to understand the mission of what you were doing. And that is unbelievable to me, especially with what's going on even now. I mean, it's so important, because I think my brother was in Vietnam, and I remember when he came home, and he was treated like poop, and that was sad. And the things that all you guys were doing was a plus. So when you came here, it was an honor for myself and our company even to have those things. I mean, and have that, and seeing everybody and how enthusiastic they were about the mission. And I think that's what it was early on, going into Washington and putting, I mean, the monuments and all that. It'd be a big difference. And I always enjoyed that. I always thought it was great. That's why a buddy of mine gave me, I got a jacket, I have a little vest.
Yes, you did.
Yep.
Yes, you did. So we're really coming down on time here. So my last question is going to be a Frank Sinatra song. But before you answer that, is there anything else that you want to share, Barry?
The only thing that I would share is that it's a great business, and you'll get out of it what you put into it. And always, I always say this: surround yourself by positive people. There's too many negative people, and you don't need to do that. You need to find the positives, and enjoy what you do. Be passionate about it. If you're not, go find something you're passionate about.
Good advice, young and old. Good advice.
Right.
All right. So the last question, the Frank Sinatra song. I think I know what it is, but probably no one else does.
Well, from a Chicago boy, it's Chicago, my kind of town.
I knew that. That's one of my favorites as well.
I did, because I didn't mention John Cookta has been a great person to me, mentor to me. We've talked a lot.
You listed some of the most brilliant, trusted, respected, gracious people with Goldberg and John and the folks that you mentioned, Midrayan Bamba, all those people. I mean, they're incredible people. And so it's an honor for me to be even mentioned with those people, but more importantly, it's an honor for me to call you friend. So, and now that we can share the Chicago song with Sinatra, we're good. So with that, Barry, I am going to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I love you dearly and enjoy your retirement.
Thank you, Mike, and I love you and your family. Thank you.